all across the country. Congressman Rick Berg joins us on the Scott Hennen Show in the Common Sense Club, member of that influential freshman class that is shaking things up in our nation's capital, trying to get this country back on the right track. Rick, how you doing?
Hey, Scott, doing good. Thanks for having me.
So it's back at it after a few weeks of common sense among folks at home. Are you looking forward to rolling up the sleeves and trying to go back at it in D.C.?
Well, I tell you what, I am recharged and fired up after talking to North Dakotans over the last few weeks, and I just really hope that the senators and congressmen from other parts of this country were listening to their public, because I think if they were, I think we're going to start to get things back on track.
What was the overwhelming message that you heard? What's your takeaway from your time back chatting with constituents?
Well, I'd say uncertainty. I mean, everyone is like, from what I'm hearing, is they're saying, what's the direction? What we need to do, quite frankly, to get the country back on track is we need to lay down a path of, here's how we're going to balance our spending. Here's what we're going to do to reduce the regulation. And here's how we're going to encourage the private sector. I'm hearing from small business that they don't know what regulations are going to be imposed. They're very concerned about that. They're concerned about, tax policy. And when I talk to people that are, retired or close to retirement, they're saying, gee, I'm not quite sure if I can retire now. I'm not sure what our economy is going to do. So, across the board, we need to get our economy going. We need to get jobs going. But then we need some fiscal soundness as we do that.
Obviously, at a time of change and a fiscal meltdown going on in the United States of America, some programs are being threatened. I noticed at one of your town hall meetings out in Jamestown, some folks were concerned about air service there. And obviously, there are subsidies by the federal government to provide air service. Some folks were upset about that. Are you finding any willingness among folks to say, hey, here's something we can do without, just go fix this problem? Or is it don't move my cheese and just go fix it other ways?
No, I think here in North Dakota, people are very supportive of saying, "Hey, we need to get the budget balanced," and I mean that's a fundamental key. And there's some with the essential air service. I mean, the intent there is, how do you kind of kickstart something so a community can support it on its own, and that's really what that whole program needs to be reformed and looked at. But what we're seeing, and again, I think one of the fundamental things the next 3 months is going to be this balanced budget amendment. I mean, it's the one thing that I've seen that can fundamentally change how we budget in Washington and how we budget for the federal government, and that is going to be voted on by the House, and it's going to be voted on by the U.S. Senate. If it passes, it'll go to the states with a chance of becoming a constitutional amendment.
And, I couldn't agree with you anymore. That probably more than anything would be a game changer because it would instill the fiscal discipline necessary. Imagine if Ken Conrad had voted differently when this came up in 96, 97, and 95, when it previously was, and he was the one vote that could have made a difference and had that implemented. Imagine if that had been put in place then, where we'd be now versus where we are.
Well, exactly. I mean, you think about what if America, rather than having $14.5 trillion in debt, what if we didn't have any debt? I mean, America would be the global leader, the global powerhouse, rather than every month we're borrowing from foreign governments and borrowing a bunch from China just to keep our economy going.
Yeah, if we have a balanced budget amendment, clearly you're going to have to prioritize. And folks in Jamestown and Devil's Lake and others might have to say, wait a minute, if the federal government, I mean, here's an example. Rob Port at his blog did a little math on this. From May of 2006 through May of 2011, there were 5,000 some odd flights in Jamestown. And there was about $5.6 million in subsidies from the FAA. That's about $1,100 a flight. If you go down to passengers, it's about $291 per passenger that's subsidized. Devil's Lake, for that same time period, had fewer flights, 3,720, even more in subsidies, $7.1 million. So flights from the airport were subsidized at a rate of about $1,900 each and about $305 per passenger. And I get, if I lived in Devil's Lake or Jamestown, I'd prefer that there be air service. The question is, if it can't be supported without federal tax dollars, is that not an example of something where we've got to say, hey, more important is to get the fiscal house in order of the United States of America, which is, our biggest threat right now. And if we don't, we're going to be in big trouble. So we're going to give where we can give. Would that not be a natural example of something that's probably going to have to go if you have a balanced budget amendment?
Well, Scott, again, we've talked about this. It's like 10, 6, and 4. We're spending $10 billion a day as a federal government. we have $6 billion in income, and we're borrowing $4 billion. I mean, there's no question that this whole system is unsustainable. There needs to be kind of a different way of well, you have to look at it differently. You have to fundamentally do things differently. And I think the first thing you got to do is you have to balance the budget. You have to work towards a balanced budget. Then once we balance our annual budget, then we can work to reducing our deficit.
Do you, I mean, is this a tough sell for some folks? You know, I mean, in other words, do you sense people are willing to hey, do what you got to do to get this fiscal house in order, and whether it's okay, you know, we got to look at we got to look at the ethanol subsidies, we got to look at air service, we got to look at everything. Are people willing to contribute their share?
You know, I think people in North Dakota understand. You know, we've had tough times in North Dakota. We've tightened our belt, and as we've tightened our belt and encouraged the private sector to grow our economy and grow jobs, and people understand that, and it works. I think it's a tough sell nationally because there's a lot of people out there that, you know, they know the rhetoric and they say the rhetoric, but you know, they just deep down they don't believe it, and it's a clash between people, and you're going to see it this week, I'm sure, with the president's proposal that he's going to roll out. I haven't seen the details of that, but it's going to be, you know, spending more money, growing government, and to somehow hope that this is going to jumpstart our economy. And with unemployment at 9% and our economy stalled, you know, I think, again, people in North Dakota and people that, you know, really understand the long-term economics understand that you have to have a fiscally solid government that's not spending more than it makes in order to encourage the private sector, encourage the economy to grow and create jobs.
Take a short break, come back and talk about a big speech from President Obama, yet another speech on jobs this week and more with Congressman Rick Berg. Continuing our conversation with Congressman Rick Berg, who's D.C. bound after a recess, getting an opportunity to visit one-on-one with a lot of constituents, and now headed back for what will be a joint session of Congress and a speech from President Obama. I hesitate to even anticipate speeches anymore because we've had a lot of speeches about jobs and a lot of proposals and plans, and it just ends up as empty rhetoric. You anticipate this week being anything different from President Obama on the jobs front, Rick?
Well, you know, I'm hopeful. I really am hopeful. But the one thing I've learned the last 8 months is there's a lot of rhetoric, a lot of speeches, but, you know, very little action. And, I mean, I think what people want is they want real solutions. And I'm hopeful, I mean, that the president's going to say, hey, we need to get the economy back. I'm going to put politics aside, and he'll start supporting some of the things we've been trying to do in the House to rein in the spending and rein in the regulations and get the private sector going again. I mean, the energy industry, I mean, that's an area that has tremendous potential for America, not only to reduce our dependency on foreign oil, but also to jumpstart industry and business here in America. And so, I mean, there's just a whole host of things that I would love to see in the speech tonight. On the other hand, if it's just, you know, another government program that's more spending, more borrowing, I'm afraid that's going to further push our economy back. And so, again, I'm looking forward to it, and I'm hopeful because this is a critical time.
Well, you mentioned the energy industry. Prime example to me of the mixed signals there. You have a domestic energy production that's making a difference. North Dakota is a prime example of it. Yet the Obama administration seems more focused on putting billions into failed programs that don't work. The green energy agenda, like, for instance, you know, the solar company that just went bankrupt. And I'll give you another example. The Obama Justice Department, through Tim Purdon, is taking 7 oil companies doing business in North Dakota to criminal court over 28 dead birds found over a 45-day period when there was tons of flooding and everything else going on. What's your reaction to that decision?
Well, I mean, those are the things that are creating all this uncertainty in our economy. And the reason we have a high unemployment rate is, you know, business out there. I mean, they're just worried about expanding. They're worried about it reinvesting when they've got an administration that is trying to get them and trying to impact them every time they turn around. And so, again, we need common sense regulation. We need common sense rules, but having a lack of a clear path, a lack of certainty, people are sitting on their money. They're not investing it. And the energy industry is a perfect example of where, again, there's tremendous opportunity for jobs, for our economy, but it also for our country's security. If we can reduce our dependence on foreign oil, I mean, that's probably going to do more for America long term than anything else.
Also, my understanding, by the way, on the Purdon prosecution is there was notice to the media before the oil companies were even aware of the charges. Coincidentally, a day after, some major national publicity for the oil boom in North Dakota on CNBC. So it seemed like an effort on behalf of the administration to sort of, put that positive news down and actually, announce criminal charges before the companies were even notified of that. Man, should dead birds be the purview of the U.S. Justice Department, do you believe?
Well, it's certainly the dialogue got to go with the companies first. But again, we've got some pretty serious issues that we're dealing with countrywide, and I'm not sure if I'd make this a big priority.
By the way, the jobs numbers worse and worse and worse. First time since 1945, the goose egg in the August job numbers. Does the worsening economic picture, job picture, change anything in Washington? Add some urgency to fixing this? I mean, put some wind at your back in these solutions at all?
Well, my hope is that the senators and House people across this country have gone out, and I'm hopeful they've heard the same thing I have. That people are saying, you know what? I don't care if you're Republican or Democrat. Get this fixed. Roll up your sleeves. Reduce the spending. Show us a path that gets us to a balanced annual budget nationally. Common sense regulations. Don't allow these regulations to go amok. If people have heard that, when they come back this next week, I'm hopeful they're going to roll up their sleeves and, again, do the things that are critical to get our country back, get our economy back on track. And, very simply, we have to show the public that Washington gets it. We have a path to a balanced budget. We control the regulations. We have stability in our taxation. I think the private sector is going to create the jobs that's going to pull us out of this recession. Without that clear direction, I don't see anything changing until after the next election.
Eric Cantor has put out a memo talking about regulation and taxation and the drag that is on the economy. Seems to be a big focus for the GOP leadership in the House this fall. You have Speaker Boehner with a speech here coming out in the next number of weeks at the Economic Club. So while the president seems politically to be signaling the plan is to run against Congress, to take on you and other members of the Republicans in Congress and make this a fight about him versus Congress, I see more in the way of solutions and ideas coming out of your caucus. Can that break through the noise, do you believe?
Well, I sure hope so. I mean, there's no question that the regulations. I think we've identified 219 regulations that cost our economy over $1 billion over 10 years, and we've got a bill called the RAIN Act that's really focused on reining in the regulations. And it's as you talked about the these regulations and things that our federal government's doing that's creating this uncertainty that's discouraging business and discouraging the job creators from growing those jobs. And so we have to get over that hump. If the president's speech is about politics, again, that'll be very disappointing to me, and I'm sure it'll be disappointing to the Americans across this country.
By the way, a major labor leader has called for a war on Republicans, saying, this is Hoffa, said President Obama, this is your army, meaning the unions. We are ready to march. Let's take those SOBs out. And he didn't use the acronym SOBs. Should President Obama condemn that, do you think, or do you expect this to be a war in the way of an election effort?
Yeah, this is a war, but it's a war about the future for our children. It's a war about the future of this country. And again, I wish the politics weren't so loud and screaming out there, and I wish people would roll up their sleeves and get things done. But we have to start focusing not on the poll today or the poll tomorrow, but really focusing on how do we get this country turned around, for the long term. And it's going to take tough decisions. It's going to take leadership. But it's the only way we can get this country, back on track, in my opinion.
Are you expecting your own race? Obviously, announcing that you'll be running for Kent Conrad's open seat of the Senate. I mean, do you think this is going to be something that all across the country? I mean, you got labor leaders saying, "Hey, let's have a war on Republicans." Are you expecting a war? I mean, I'm hoping President Obama is going to stick with his, "Hey, watch the tone, careful on the rhetoric." But it'll be interesting to see if he'll actually condemn this. But I mean, even in your race in North Dakota, would you expect this to be that ugly?
Well, I mean, I don't know what to anticipate. I think this next election is going to be more about philosophy than personalities. I mean, I see this as a clash between, quite frankly, do we grow government, do we increase spending, do we increase our debt and our borrowing, increasing our regulation, or On the other hand, do we, reduce our spending? Do we rein in the regulation? Do we encourage the private sector?
Let's hope so. Let's certainly hope so. Congressman Rick Berg, appreciate the time. Good to chat with you. We'll talk again soon.